There are a number of swing states that we all need to pay attention to when it comes to 2024, the election, but Georgia, I think, is one of the most important, okay? It's got 16 electoral votes. Back in 2016, Donald Trump actually won Georgia, but you might recall that ever since then, the state has gone a bit more blue. We got 2 Democratic senators out of it. Joe Biden narrowly, very narrowly won that state, leading to the perfect phone call, just find me 12,000 votes. And so goes Georgia, could well go the election. Donald Trump, of course, if he wins it, maybe he's on track to win the whole race. And by the way, if Kamala Harris wins Georgia, that's probably all she wrote on this thing. And so both campaigns are trying hard to win. But one campaign is trying more than just to win. They're trying to not lose at all costs. And that's the Republicans, because they've made some changes to the electoral rules in Georgia, particularly the way that elections are certified in Georgia. That is now being challenged for very good reasons. So let's talk briefly about some of the changes Republicans have made, why they're so deeply insidious, and why you, whether you live in Georgia or not, should care about whether these rules are allowed to stand. One of the rules specifies that if local election board members identify discrepancies, which sounds specific, but is actually very vague and could refer to almost anything, quote, no votes shall be counted from that precinct pending an investigation.
A storm is tearing up the digital media industry. Only our audience can save us in these difficult times. Help us reach our goal of 100,000 new members at tyt.com/team.
Now, that might sound reasonable to you. Well, there's a discrepancy. I guess we don't count the votes, and we have an investigation. For how long? How long do we have that investigation for? Maybe long enough that that precinct doesn't ever count. Maybe long enough that a county never counts. Maybe long enough that Georgia never counts. Oh, wouldn't that just be so unfortunate? I mean, they have to look into the discrepancies. And by the way, the second rule, if board members identify an error they deem cannot be corrected, the board, quote, shall determine a method to compute the votes justly. So when I lay out a nightmare scenario where they just delay so that they don't have to actually certify a precinct or a county or whatever, that's bad. But that other one is saying, oh, we may never know what it is, so let's figure out something to compute a number. They could just come up with a figure and then submit that, which is even worse. So thankfully, the Democrats are actually fighting back against this, and they have a lawsuit. It was filed in Georgia State Court by the DNC, the Georgia Democratic Party, and Democratic members of several county election boards, taking aim at both of those rules and trying to get them overturned. So what they're asking for is for the court to declare that, quote, absent a valid judicial order to the contrary, election superintendents must certify the results of the November 5th election no later than 5 p.m. on November, basically saying, okay, if the discrepancies that are serious enough that an actual judge can be convinced that it's serious, then okay, we can do all this nonsense stuff that you want to do. But we're not just going to have some rando election superintendent decide to sway the results of our entire election because they saw 2,000 mules or something. And so that's their challenge. It goes on to say, if election officials have concerns about possible election irregularities, they are free to voice those concerns at the time of certification so that they may be considered and adjudicated by judges in any subsequent election contest. But they may not point to those election irregularities or anything else as a basis for delaying certification or denying it entirely. Absent a valid court order, certification by the deadline is mandatory. And this is super important. I mean, we have been saying this since 2000, that yes, we need a great candidate. We need to run a great campaign. We need to leave it all on the road or whatever. But we also need to pay attention to the elections that don't draw a lot of attention, that aren't super sexy. You may not even hear the results of many of them. And it is for these secretaries of state at the state level, as well as for the county boards of election, because there have been times in which they've tried to take these over and put, like, dyed red MAGA people on and lost. But there have been a lot where they've won in Georgia and in other states. Arizona's another big one. And while Donald Trump might, in theory, be trying to win this election, I think that's an interesting topic for debate. There are a lot of people who are totally willing to just throw the election into chaos, believing that, well, if Georgia suddenly doesn't actually certify an election, it doesn't send the results to DC, and hey, maybe we can do it in Pennsylvania, maybe we can do it in Arizona, then maybe nationally the election doesn't get certified. And then we have the thing they wanted in 2020, where it gets thrown back to the states and each state has equal votes or whatever. So rural states that are dominated by the Republicans and basically have nobody living there have as much influence as California, New York, or whatever. That was the plan in 2020, and this is how you get to that plan. It is a way more plausible path to that strategy than trying to get Mike Pence to decertify the election or whatever, and we should all be worried about it. And so this election is going to go forward. By the way, Democratic State Senator Nabila Islam Parks, who we previously interviewed a couple times on the Damage Report, has filed a formal state ethics complaint alleging that a couple of these board members broke state law and pushing the rules changes so close to the general election. By the way, Janice Johnston, I think it was at a Trump rally and got called out by Trump for the crowd to applaud. He was so excited about the changes they'd made to Georgia's election. I think John Oliver might have profiled that in a recent episode. And so Donald Trump is totally aware of the way that they're trying to rig things, literally rig things, not the way that it's used colloquially, but actually make it impossible for Kamala Harris to win in Georgia. And so, yeah, we can put up that last thing, what Trump said about them, pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. Well, one of those three things, maybe. I think that's the one he cares about. And by the way, how is it legal to praise partisan members of a state election board as saying they're fighting for victory? He's saying it out loud. He's not even hiding the path anymore. Hopefully people are paying attention. I know that some good Democrats at the state level are. We're going to see what happens with that lawsuit, but this is how you actually steal an election. Not with the ghosts of Hugo Chavez or Italian satellites or whatever, by just refusing to certify the vote regardless of how bad your candidate loses.
Thanks for watching our video. Did you know that you can support our show by becoming a subscriber? Just click the subscribe button and also ring the bell so that you get notifications when we're live or when we post new content.